Bad news for anybody who takes getting the mail delivered for free for granted. Recently, the Trump administration, advocates in Congress, and consulting firms like Mayor Pete's former employee, McKinsey and Company, have all called for the privatization of the post office. Now, according to a report in Fortune, that is not some distant Republican goal. It could happen as soon as next month. Now, this all starts with the Trump administration needing to appoint a new postmaster general since the current one is stepping down. And he must do this by the end of January. And so the clock is ticking. Now he can appoint one. Now, what makes this even worse is that the new leadership will be handpicked and approved by the Postal Service Board of Governors. Now, you might think, okay, what's the problem with that, right? This is how it's set up. This is how it's supposed to work. Well, who makes up this Board of Governors? Well, turns out that it's mostly men with it's old men with investment banking and private banking experience. These are corporate guys, 3 of which were appointed personally by the Trump administration. Now, they get to make that decision along with the current Postmaster General and her deputy. Now, the current Postmaster General was appointed by the Obama administration and is fighting against privatization, to be fair. However, I'm wondering if she will get overruled by the very pro-banker, pro-corporate wing of that group, of that board. So I'm really concerned about the direction that this is going. Now, once the new leadership is in place, according to Fortune, the board will be tasked by the Trump administration with creating a package of large structural changes intending to help the ailing postal service. So that's where it gets bad, potentially bad. Now, the post office right now is in a budget crisis. Why? Well, it's because they have to pre-fund healthcare for every single employee. This is something that no other government entity or corporation has to do. But they now especially have to do it thanks to Republicans in Congress. So now, what's interesting about this, right, is that the post office is not federally funded. No taxpayer money goes to the post office. The post office survives on stamps and mailing, their flat rate boxes and mailing packages and things like that. So they do not get any money from Congress. But Congress can control how much money they charge for flat rate boxes and shipping rates and all that stuff. So it's a bit of a strange thing that Congress can make those decisions, and yet they do not appropriate any money for the post office. So now, let me get to where the privatization push comes from. And you might say, well, doesn't it come from them not making any money, having a shortfall? Partly, yes. But the push really came from the Trump administration, who issued an executive order to create a postal task force led by Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin. Now, they had to put out a report. And again, keep this in mind, right? The fact that Congress does not fund the post office. Quote, the USPS's current business model has become outdated due to changes in technology, markets, and customer needs and preferences. It is unsustainable and must be fundamentally changed if the USPS is to avoid a financial collapse and a taxpayer-funded bailout. Now, there are parts of that are completely untrue. The problem is, it's not that there are changes that impacted them. It's the fact that they are the only agency that is forced to pre-fund employee health care, right? That change, again, which was a result of mainly Republicans, is responsible for 80% of their budget shortfall. Meaning that they would still, have a little bit of a problem due to some of those other changes, right? But it wouldn't be as drastic as it is. At this point, they're set to run out of money in 2024. So clock's ticking, right? If you just remove that requirement for pre-funding healthcare, they could be solvent for a lot longer. Now, did the Mnuchin report talk about doing that as a possible solution to this. No, of course not. No, the Mnuchin report said that the way to do this is to sell off pieces of the post office, to privatize it. They recommended that the agency roll back collective bargaining and sell off pieces of the service for private industry. The same OMB report also suggests that the post office should not even be allowed to ship boxes. So now wait, how are they going to make money from that? Well, they're not. How are they going to address their budget shortfall? They're not. They're going to sell off and ban the post office from shipping boxes so they can hand it off to FedEx, UPS, and all their basically donors and say, here you go, you can handle all this now. You can create these monopolies and charge whatever the hell you want to ship a box. And what are we as Americans supposed to do? Well, we're supposed to suck it up and pay our new UPS overlords. That's the situation, right? And of course, prices would go absolutely up. According to the Institute for Policy Studies, they said that businesses from the online retail shops to manufacturers shipping parts to customers in need could face sharply higher shipping costs, leading to higher prices for their customers or lower profits for their businesses. Now, we all know that they would pass on that extra cost to the consumers, so really, we would end up paying way more from shipping than we already do. Small businesses, they said, would also be hit especially hard. What about small business, guys? Since they don't have the clout to negotiate the same level of shipping discounts as big corporations. Not only that, but also privatization would hurt rural Americans. Remember, FedEx and UPS and all the others don't ship out to these rural areas. They rely on the post office to do that. Why? Because there's no money in shipping out to the boondocks. So, ironically, the same people who support privatization of government would be the ones hurt by this. Now, as for the post office, I got to be fair and reference polls that show that there's the post office has a 90% approval rate. And so people love the post office as an institution. They love the idea of the post office, which is government run. And they don't want to see this privatized. So again, let's be fair about that, right? So look, this is a real problem. Do you think the Trump administration would be willing to anger 90% of Americans trying to privatize the post office? I absolutely believe that they would, because they don't care. All they do is serve their donors. And by the way, this isn't just about Republicans. There are Democrats as well. Pete Buttigieg. I mentioned McKinsey, right? Well, part of Buttigieg's McKinsey work was at the post office. In fact, he was there, and he had worked on the post office case when he consulted with McKinsey. Now, Buttigieg's team came out in front of this and denied that he had worked on the efforts, saying that he was, quote, part of a team tasked with generating ideas to increase revenue, like selling greeting cards and increasing the use of flat rate boxes, and had, quote, never worked on cost coding or anything involving staff reorganization or the privatization of essential post office services. However, that comes in contrast to Union President Mark Diemenstein. So now this is Postal Union, right? President Mark Diemenstein. And he had said, or is it Diamonstein? He said that Buttigieg's work and McKinsey's work led to the closing of many mail processing centers, losing people lots of jobs. He said, quote, I will say generally, shame on anybody that was part of facilitating these McKinsey reports. This is the opposite of what the people of this country need. So understand that there is an effort, and has been an effort, to sell the post office to private corporations. And it's a result of years of legislative sabotage and corporate scheming. This is what happens when private industry is allowed to compete alongside a public good. So I feel compelled to point this out as a reason why a public option in our healthcare system would also fail. Because think about it, it would be a lot like this, where you have private corporations, private health insurers, and a public option that would be sabotaged through legislative efforts because of money in politics, and leading, once again, to the privatization and the ending of a public good. So just think about that when you think about, or when you go to check your mail, for one, and when you think about a single payer versus a public option. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.